Jax's revenge domain. They announced Scott's promotion during Thursday morning's all-hands meeting at 9:47 a.m. Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately, with a compensation package that included $180,000 base salary, a $75,000 increase from his current senior architect position. The conference room erupted in applause. I clapped along with everyone else, maintaining the same neutral expression I'd perfected over 20 years of watching less qualified people climb past me. What they didn't announce was my compensation adjustment. That came later, delivered privately by Linda Foster, our VP of Human Resources, in a hastily scheduled 3:30 p.m. meeting that lasted exactly 12 minutes. "Howard, we want you to know how much Technova Solutions values your contributions," Linda said, sliding a single-page document across her desk. "Your mentorship of Scott has been invaluable to his development and our organization's success. We're pleased to offer you a loyalty recognition bonus of $12,000 payable over the next 6 months." I read the document twice. $12,000 spread over 6 months, approximately $2,000 per month before taxes, for 9 years of training the person who just received a $75,000 raise. "This is a one-time recognition payment," I said, keeping my voice level, "not a salary adjustment." "That's correct. We feel this appropriately recognizes your mentorship contributions while maintaining our compensation structure integrity." I signed the acknowledgement form. Linda seemed pleased that I hadn't argued. She had no way of knowing that I'd stopped arguing with Technova Solutions approximately 8 months ago, when I realized that competence and loyalty were liabilities in their promotion calculus, not assets. My name is Howard Mitchell. I'm 49 years old, and I just watched the junior developer I trained from day one leapfrog me into the CTO position while I received what amounts to a monthly tip for 9 years of work. Before I explain what happened next, let me establish exactly what those 9 years looked like. I joined Technova Solutions in March 2015 as a senior IT systems architect with expertise in cybersecurity frameworks and cloud migration strategies. The company was mid-sized then, about 220 employees, focused on providing technology consulting to regional banks and financial institutions. My role was designing secure infrastructure that helped these institutions modernize their legacy systems without compromising data integrity. Scott Anderson joined in September 2015 as a junior developer, fresh from a state university with a computer science degree and exactly zero practical experience in enterprise security architecture. He was 24 years old, enthusiastic, and completely overwhelmed by the complexity of financial sector compliance requirements. His first assignment was assisting me with a cloud migration project for Continental Banking Systems, a $450 million initiative to move their core banking platform to AWS. I spent 8 weeks teaching him the fundamentals: how to design secure network architectures, how to implement multi-factor authentication protocols, how to configure intrusion detection systems that could handle real-time transaction monitoring. Look, the kid struggled initially, confusing basic security concepts, making configuration errors that would have gotten him terminated if anyone else had been reviewing his work. I covered for him, corrected his mistakes before they reached client deliverables, walked him through every security protocol until he understood not just the implementation, but the reasoning behind it. Spent evenings after regular work hours explaining compliance frameworks that should have been prerequisites for the position. By month 6, Scott was functional. By month 12, he was competent. By year 3, he was genuinely skilled at the technical work. I had essentially provided him with a graduate-level education in enterprise cybersecurity while maintaining my own client responsibilities and project deadlines. Here's the thing. During those 9 years, I guided Scott through 89 distinct client engagements. I taught him how to build security frameworks that Technova eventually sold as proprietary methodology to other clients. I brought him into strategy meetings with C-suite executives at Fortune 500 companies and coached him beforehand on how to present technical security concepts to non-technical business leaders. I introduced him to industry contacts that became his professional network. When Technova won the Continental Banking contract in 2017, a $3.2 million engagement that became our largest client relationship, I designed the initial cybersecurity architecture that secured the deal. Scott had assisted, but the core methodology was mine. By 2020, when that contract renewed at $3.8 million annually, Scott was presenting the updated security frameworks to Continental's board using architectures I'd taught him to build. I never received credit in those board presentations. My name appeared in project documentation, buried in technical appendices as Senior Systems Architect, Infrastructure Design. Scott's name appeared on presentation slides as Lead Security Architect, Strategic Implementation. The pattern was consistent. I built the intellectual property. Scott delivered it to clients with the confidence and presentation skills I'd coached him to develop. Executives saw Scott in client meetings, saw his polished presentations, assumed he was the primary architect behind the security solutions. By 2021, Technova had grown to 380 employees. Scott had been promoted to Senior Security Architect, a lateral move to my position despite having 7 years less experience. His salary had increased to $105,000. Mine had increased to $110,000. A $5,000 difference for someone with 7 additional years of expertise and responsibility for every significant security framework in our division. I raised this disparity with Linda in my 2021 performance review. Her response was diplomatic but clear. Howard, you're incredibly valuable as a technical specialist, but Scott has demonstrated client-facing skills and innovative thinking that align with our growth trajectory. We need different types of talent for different roles. Translation: Scott was better at corporate politics and executive visibility. I was better at actual cybersecurity architecture. Technova valued the former more than the latter. I stopped pushing for promotions after that conversation. Instead, I focused on documenting everything. Every framework I designed, every methodology I developed, every client relationship I maintained, every hour I spent training Scott and the 6 other junior developers who'd rotated through our division. Because I understood something that Linda and the rest of Technova's executive team apparently didn't. Institutional knowledge is only valuable when the institution can retain it. The emergency client call happened Friday morning at 6:22 a.m. Continental Banking's CISO, Norman Butler, had discovered a critical security breach in their customer database. Unauthorized access to approximately 280,000 customer records, including social security numbers and account information. The intrusion detection systems we'd implemented were showing alert patterns that conflicted with their internal security protocols, and Norman couldn't determine whether the breach originated from external threats or internal vulnerabilities. Scott called me at 6:28 a.m., voice tight with panic. Howard, I need you on this call immediately. Norman is asking technical questions about the network segmentation architecture, and I can't explain the firewall configuration logic. He's threatening to terminate the contract and report us to federal regulators. I was already awake, drinking coffee in my kitchen, reading industry news on my tablet. My reading glasses were on the counter next to my blood pressure medication, reminders that I wasn't the 29-year-old who'd started at Technova anymore. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. What specifically is he asking about? The database access controls for the customer information system. He's saying our authentication protocols failed to prevent the breach, and he wants to know why our multi-layer security didn't trigger automatic lockdown procedures. I don't know how to explain the decision tree logic. I knew exactly how to explain it because I designed that authentication system in 2018 and spent 4 weeks teaching Scott the security reasoning behind using behavioral analytics for anomaly detection. He'd apparently forgotten. I'll be on the call, I said. Send me the meeting link. At 6:32 a.m., I joined the video conference. 18 people from Continental's IT security team. Scott looking exhausted and stressed. Norman Butler looking furious. Howard, thank God, Scott said when my video connected. Norman has some technical questions about the breach response protocols. Norman didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mr. Mitchell, your security architecture failed to prevent unauthorized access to our customer database. Before we discuss terminating this contract and filing regulatory reports, I need to understand why your authentication systems allowed this breach to occur. I opened my laptop, pulled up the security documentation, began walking Norman through the technical reasoning for every protocol decision, every access control layer, every monitoring system configuration. 34 minutes of explaining cybersecurity concepts to a room full of IT managers and compliance officers. Halfway through, I realized something fundamental. I was doing exactly what I'd done for 9 years. Solving problems that Scott couldn't solve. Maintaining client relationships that Scott couldn't manage. Providing expertise that Technova valued at $12,000 while paying Scott $180,000 to take credit for it. Look, I'd been here before, countless times. Scott stumbles during a client presentation. I step in with the technical details. Scott can't answer a security question. I provide the methodology explanation. Scott needs help with compliance documentation. I walk him through the requirements. For 9 years, I'd been his safety net, his technical backup, his institutional memory. And Technova just announced they valued that safety net at $12,000. At 7:06 a.m., while explaining the behavioral analytics methodology for the 4th time to a Continental vice president who still didn't understand the detection algorithms, I made a decision that would change everything. I stopped talking mid-sentence, closed my laptop, looked directly into the camera. Norman, I apologize, but I need to step away from this call. Scott can address your remaining questions. The conference room went silent. Scott's face went white. Howard, wait. I disconnected from the call, shut down my laptop, walked upstairs to my bedroom where my wife Patricia was getting ready for work. "You're home early?" she said, confused. "I thought you had that emergency Continental call." I did. I left. You left in the middle of the call? In the middle of explaining something that Scott should be able to explain himself if he's worth $180,000 as Chief Technology Officer. Patricia sat down on the bed, watching me carefully. At 47, she'd seen me come home from work frustrated more times than either of us cared to count. But this was different. This was me finally drawing a line. "What are you doing, Howard?" Something I should have done 8 months ago when I realized this company values presentation skills over actual competence. I'm not covering for Scott anymore. If he can't answer Continental security questions, that's Technova's problem, not mine. At 7:45 a.m., my phone started ringing. "Scott." I declined the call. At 7:52 a.m., text message from Scott. "Howard, please call me back. Norman is asking questions I can't answer, and he's threatening to pull the contract and report us to compliance authorities." I didn't respond. At 8:14 a.m., another call, Linda Foster. I declined. At 8:17 a.m., voicemail notification. I didn't listen to it. By 8:30 a.m., I'd received 16 calls and 28 text messages from various people at Technova. I turned my phone to airplane mode and went for a walk around the neighborhood. Here's what I learned later about what was happening at Technova while I was walking. Scott couldn't answer Continental's security questions. He tried to deflect, to schedule follow-up calls, to promise detailed written responses. Norman Butler wasn't accepting deflections. He wanted immediate answers about the breach, or he was terminating the $3.8 million annual contract and filing regulatory complaints with federal authorities. Without me on the call, Scott had no answers. He tried to explain the authentication protocols and got the security logic wrong. He tried to defend the breach response procedures and contradicted the system documentation. By 8:45 a.m., Norman had ended the call and emailed Technova's CEO, Roger Williams, formally notifying him that Continental was suspending all ongoing work pending a comprehensive security audit and possible regulatory investigation. Suspending work on a $3.8 million annual contract gets CEO attention very quickly. By 9:30 a.m., Roger had called an emergency executive meeting. By 10:15 a.m., they'd determined they needed me on a call with Continental to salvage the relationship. By 10:22 a.m., Linda was calling me again. I was home from my walk by then, drinking water in my kitchen, phone still in airplane mode. Patricia was watching me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "You're really doing this?" "I'm really doing this. They can't have it both ways. Either I'm valuable enough to pay me appropriately and promote me based on my actual contributions, or I'm just a technical specialist they can compensate with a $12,000 tip while promoting the person I trained into a CTO position." They chose the latter. Now they get to see what that choice costs. At 11 a.m., I turned my phone back on. 52 missed calls, 74 text messages, 15 voicemails. I listened to the most recent voicemail from Roger Williams himself. "Howard, this is Roger. I understand you had to step away from the Continental call this morning. I need you to call me immediately. We have a situation that requires your expertise, and I want to discuss how we can resolve this together. Please call me as soon as you get this message." I deleted the voicemail, didn't call back. At 11:47 a.m., someone knocked on my front door. I looked through the window. Linda Foster standing on my porch in business attire, looking stressed. I opened the door but didn't invite her inside. "Linda, Howard, we need to talk. Can I come in? I'd prefer to keep this conversation brief. What do you need?" She took a breath, clearly frustrated at being kept on the porch. "Roger needs you to join a call with Norman Butler at 2 p.m. today. Continental is threatening to terminate the contract and file regulatory complaints unless we can provide satisfactory answers to their security questions." And Scott? Scott wasn't able to address their concerns this morning. That's unfortunate. Scott is the Chief Technology Officer. Surely he should be capable of addressing technical questions about security systems he's been presenting to Continental for the past 4 years. "Howard, we both know you designed those systems. You have the technical expertise we need on this call." Then perhaps Technova should have considered that before promoting Scott to CTO and offering me a $12,000 loyalty bonus. Linda's expression hardened. "This isn't about your compensation. This is about a $3.8 million client relationship that's in jeopardy and possible regulatory violations that could damage our entire business. No, Linda, this is exactly about my compensation. It's about Technova deciding that 9 years of building the intellectual property that generates $3.8 million in annual revenue is worth $12,000, while the person who learned everything from me gets $180,000 to present my work. You made that decision. Now you get to live with the consequences. Are you refusing to participate in client calls? Because that could be considered insubordination. I'm not refusing anything. I'm simply unavailable for the 2 p.m. call. I have personal matters to attend to." "What personal matters? That's private. If Technova needs technical expertise to maintain the Continental relationship, I suggest asking your Chief Technology Officer. That's why you're paying him $180,000, isn't it? For his cybersecurity expertise." I closed the door before she could respond. The 2 p.m. call with Continental happened without me. I know this because Roger sent me an email at 2:51 p.m. describing it as a difficult conversation that would have benefited from your technical input. Translation: it was a disaster. What I learned later through a former colleague was that Scott had attempted to answer Norman's questions again, gotten the security protocols wrong again, and Norman had ended the call after 29 minutes. Continental formally terminated their contract at 3:20 p.m. that afternoon and filed preliminary regulatory complaints about Technova's security practices. $3.8 million in annual revenue gone, plus potential federal investigations. By Monday afternoon, I'd received a call from Roger's assistant requesting an 8 a.m. meeting for Tuesday morning. I accepted. Over the weekend, I'd also contacted 8 former colleagues who'd left Technova over the past 5 years for competitor firms. I asked each of them the same question. Would their current employer be interested in someone with my background and expertise? 7 of them said yes immediately. The 8th said their firm wasn't currently hiring but would create a position if I was interested. By Monday morning at 8 a.m., I had 4 formal interview requests. By Monday afternoon, I had 3 preliminary compensation discussions that all started above $135,000 base salary with significantly better bonus structures than Technova had ever offered. I showed up to Roger's 8 a.m. meeting exactly on time. He was waiting in the large conference room with Linda and Barry Thompson, Technova's chief operating officer. The presence of the COO told me they understood the seriousness of the situation. "Howard, thank you for coming," Roger began. "I want to start by saying we value your contributions to Technova, and we recognize there may have been some miscommunication about your role in compensation." I sat down but said nothing. Let them do the talking. "The situation with Continental was unfortunate," Roger continued. "We've lost a significant client relationship, and in retrospect, we should have better supported Scott with technical expertise during that call." "Scott is your Chief Technology Officer," I said. "Why would he need my support?" The 3 of them exchanged glances. Barry spoke up. "Howard, we all know you've been instrumental in developing our cybersecurity methodology. Your technical expertise is unique within our organization. Scott has strong leadership skills and strategic vision, but he benefits from collaboration with someone of your technical depth. So you're saying Scott can't actually do the job you promoted him into without my assistance?" Another exchange of glances. Linda tried a different approach. "We want to discuss a compensation adjustment that better reflects your value to the organization. We're prepared to offer you a salary increase to $125,000, effective immediately, along with an expanded bonus structure tied to division performance. $125,000, a $15,000 raise. Still, $55,000 less than Scott's new salary, for someone who actually built the systems that Scott presented. That's a generous offer, I said neutrally. What would my title be? You'd remain senior systems architect, Roger said, but with enhanced responsibilities and recognition of your technical leadership role. So I'd be making $125,000 as a senior systems architect, while Scott makes $180,000 as CTO, despite the fact that I built the methodologies he can't explain and maintain the client relationships he can't manage without my assistance. The offer sounds nice, I said, standing up, but I'm going to decline. Howard, please reconsider, Linda said quickly. We can discuss this further. The compensation package is negotiable. I'm sure it is, but here's what's not negotiable. My understanding that Technova's compensation philosophy values presentation over substance. Scott is excellent at presenting work to clients. I'm excellent at building the work he presents. For 9 years, I accepted that dynamic because I believed competence would eventually be rewarded appropriately. Thursday's announcement proved that belief was incorrect. We're trying to correct that now, Barry said. You're trying to correct it after losing a $3.8 million client because you promoted someone who couldn't defend his own work without my assistance. That's not compensation philosophy. That's crisis management. I walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. I trained Scott everything he knows about cybersecurity architecture. I built the systems. I developed the methodologies. I maintained the client relationships. And you paid me $12,000 to mentor him into a position paying $55,000 more than mine. If you want to understand why you lost Continental, that's your answer. You systematically undervalued the person who generated your intellectual property while promoting the person who commoditized it. That's not a sustainable business model. I left the conference room at 8:34 a.m. By 8:40 a.m., I'd cleaned out my desk. By 8:47 a.m., I'd surrendered my building access badge to reception. By 9 a.m., I was driving home. Patricia was working from home that morning. She looked up from her laptop when I walked in at 9:15. You quit? I quit. Just like that? Just like that. They offered me $125,000 to stay and fix their Continental problem, while Scott keeps his $180,000 director title for work he can't actually do. I declined. Do you have another job lined up? I have 3 interviews scheduled this week, 2 preliminary compensation discussions that started above $140,000, and a pretty strong negotiating position because every conversation starts with, "We heard what happened with Technova and Continental." Word spreads fast in the cybersecurity industry. By Wednesday, I had 3 formal job offers. The best came from Quantum Tech Partners, a competitor firm that specialized in financial sector cybersecurity. They offered $165,000 base salary, performance bonuses capped at 35% of base, full benefits, and a $20,000 signing bonus. The offer came from a company that had been trying to break into the regional banking market for 3 years. They wanted someone who could build cybersecurity frameworks for financial institutions, someone who knew the market, understood the technical requirements, and had relationships with potential clients. Someone exactly like me. I accepted their offer on Thursday morning, started the following Monday. Look, here's what happened at Technova after I left. Without my technical expertise, Scott couldn't rebuild the Continental relationship. He tried to schedule calls with Norman Butler, but Norman refused to engage. Continental moved their cybersecurity contract to Quantum Tech Partners approximately 6 weeks after I joined. I didn't pitch Continental, I didn't need to. Norman called me directly at my new firm and asked if Quantum could provide the same level of technical sophistication that I'd previously delivered at Technova. I said yes. He asked me to build him a proposal. 3 weeks later, Quantum had a $4.2 million contract with Continental Banking Systems, $400,000 more than Technova had been charging them. But Continental wasn't the only client relationship that fell apart. Over the next 8 months, 4 other major clients reduced their contracts with Technova or terminated them entirely. Each situation followed the same pattern: technical questions that Scott couldn't answer, security performance issues that he couldn't diagnose, compliance concerns that he couldn't address. Technova's revenue dropped by approximately $6.5 million in the first year after I left. They hired 3 new senior architects to try to rebuild their technical capabilities, but institutional knowledge doesn't transfer instantly. The frameworks I'd built over 9 years took years to replicate, and the new hires didn't have the client relationships or industry reputation that I'd developed over 2 decades. Roger Williams reached out to me 7 months after I left, asking if I'd consider returning to Technova as Vice President of Cybersecurity Solutions, with a compensation package of $175,000 plus equity. I politely declined. I was making $165,000 at Quantum, would hit my performance bonus targets for an additional $57,000, and had better work-life balance than I'd ever had at Technova. More importantly, I was valued. Quantum's CEO, Carol Stevens, had personally told me during my interview, "We're hiring you because we need someone who can build intellectual property, not just present it. If you can do what you did at Technova for us, you'll be running this division within 3 years." 18 months after joining Quantum, I was promoted to Senior Director of Cybersecurity Solutions with a salary of $195,000. 2 years after that, I became Vice President of Financial Technology Security at $225,000 plus equity. At 53 years old, I'm making more money than I ever thought possible and actually enjoying my work again. Scott lasted 11 months at Technova after I left. Without my technical support, his limitations became obvious to everyone. He was demoted back to Senior Systems Architect at $90,000 and $90,000 pay cut, then resigned 6 months later. Last I heard, he was working for a regional IT consulting firm doing basic network administration, making approximately $75,000. I don't take pleasure in Scott's career difficulties. He was competent enough when he had proper guidance and support. His mistake wasn't accepting the promotion. His mistake was allowing Technova to promote him into a position that required technical expertise he didn't independently possess while simultaneously undervaluing the person who'd provided that expertise. Technova's mistake was more fundamental. They confused client presentation skills with actual technical capabilities. They promoted charisma over competence. They valued the person who could sell the work more than the person who could build it. That mistake cost them $6.5 million in revenue, their largest client, significant market reputation, and the institutional knowledge that had taken 9 years to develop. All to save money on my compensation while rewarding someone who couldn't function without me. You know what I learned from the whole experience? The most dangerous employee to undervalue isn't the one who complains loudly about compensation or threatens to quit. It's the one who quietly builds all your institutional knowledge, maintains your critical client relationships, and generates your competitive advantages until the day they decide they're done subsidizing your poor judgment. Because when that person leaves, they don't just take their individual contributions with them. They take the foundational expertise that everyone else's performance depends on, and you don't realize how much you needed them until you're watching $3.8 million walk out the door during a 7:06 a.m. phone call. Companies will take advantage of your expertise for as long as you let them, but when you finally stop covering for their mistakes, they realize pretty quickly what they actually lost. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and let them figure it out themselves. Technova wanted to pay me like a supporting actor while giving Scott the director's salary. They learned expensively that I wasn't supporting anyone's performance. I was the performance. Scott was just reading the script I'd written for 9 years. When you finally understand that distinction, it's usually too late to fix it. The audience has already left, and the person who wrote the script is working somewhere else, building something better, getting paid what they're actually worth. Sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is teaching people how expensive their disrespect really is. The moment you stop being indispensable to those who refuse to value you properly, you become invaluable to those who will.